Hello everyone and welcome to the e-commerce webinars that I'm running. My name's Lucia, my company is called Dello Insights, and over winter I interviewed 21 different e-commerce experts and asked about the data learnings they got from last year they're using in their business in 2025 to help it grow and to help their clients perform better. Today I'm joined by Aggie Meroni. Would you like to introduce yourself, Aggie?
Thank you so much for having me. My name's Aggie and I run an e-commerce growth agency called White Bee Digital, and we specialise in paid social, so Meta, ads, Pinterest and TikTok for ambitious e-commerce brands looking to scale.
Thank you, that's fantastic. Now Aggie, you've got a tip for us, haven't you? And today we're talking all about marketing and ad effectiveness. So what was your tip that you shared with us?
So my tip was that e-commerce brands really need to know their numbers, and in order to know their numbers, they need to forecast efficiently. So understand what their goals are and what their kind of metrics need to be in order to achieve those business goals.
Fabulous. By the way, I've got the live chat going, so if anyone's joined us live wants to ask any questions, please do so. But Aggie, that's a really interesting tip. Would you like to explain what it really means to people? You know, why does it matter to them? Why it's so important?
Definitely. So this is something that has become more important, I'd say, over the last couple of years. And it's really important for brands to understand where they want to go. So what their revenue goals are for the business, and also to give them tangible, I guess, signposts in how to get there. So it's all well and good if you're, say, generating 50 or 100k a month now and saying, oh, well, next month I want to hit 150k. Well, everyone can say that. Of course you want to increase your revenue, but what metrics you need to hit? So, you know, what does your ad budget need to be? What is your conversion rate? What is your average order value? What's your cost per click? All these metrics will, like, it's maths basically. You know, once you have the formulas, you can calculate based on certain metrics what your outcome will be. And a lot of brands were missing this piece. So they were saying, okay, well, this is our business goal. It's like, okay, but we're not hitting your metrics in order to hit that goal. And suddenly they can see that there's tangible numbers and goalposts that they need to hit in order to hit those goals. And suddenly you become really focused on improving certain things. It's like, okay, well, our average order value is too low. So what can we do to encourage more people to buy each time? Oh, the conversion rate's dropped. Why is that? Is it seasonality? Have we changed something on the website? You know, is it the design, UX, something like that? Suddenly you've got an action you can take to get closer to your goal. You know, cost per click. So this is a big one. If your cost per click is high, it could be because your CPM, so your cost per mil, has gone up. This can be because your ads aren't engaging. It could be seasonality, if everyone's targeting your market, or your click-through rate is too low. And again, that could be an indication that your ad creatives are poor for your market. So the cost per click, how much it's costing you to get people to actually go onto your website, is also going to massively impact how many people do visit your website and then how many people convert and buy from you. So that's something to investigate as well.
So it's really giving them realism around their figures and actually thinking, if I want to get to this point, this is what I need to know. I need to track it and check it over time. And before, if they can start the forecasting, they need to really have that understanding of the baseline before they get started, to actually say, this is where I am today, this is what I know impacts it, and here's how I can get there. So you're kind of using the forecast to build this bridge, aren't you, to where they want to get to.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you said, obviously, you're hinting there about maths. Obviously, I come from this very numeric background and I love numbers, so for me that sings to my heart. But I suspect that a lot of these e-commerce brands and businesses that get it set up, they're set up by very creative people, you know, who absolutely love their product, very, very good on the marketing side, you know, and the promotion, but they haven't necessarily got that kind of foundation of looking at the numbers in the same way. Is that part of the reason why why this area doesn't really happen so much as it should?
If I'm honest, this isn't a e-com founder issue necessarily. This is a general, things have changed and times have moved, like, you know, this has become a non-negotiable now, which it really wasn't about 5 years ago. When I trained in paid social, there was absolutely nothing about the financials in my training. So understanding, we were taught how to calculate the return on ad spend, but not really, what is your contribution margin, what's your return on investment, like what these numbers mean and what the impact it has on clients, so on the e-com brands, and how we can support them to understand those numbers. So a lot of work has been done independently by agencies, freelancers, to become financially numerate in e-commerce maths, basically, so that we can support e-com founders and marketing teams to understand that where they control sort of levers to performance and what the ad partner has control over, which is effectively creatives. So if you're holding back your ad agency with what they're able to show in the ads, you are stifling your performance, because you need variety now in your ads. And this, a signal that this isn't really working, is your click-through rate might be really low, and also your cost per click might be high. So that's obviously impacting the amount of sales that you're getting. Other things that your ad agency doesn't really have control over but will advise you on is your conversion rate on your websites. If this is too low, then you will be stifling your performance as well. And your average order value, your ad agency again will be guiding you and flagging this as an area of concern, but actually creating the bundles on your website or taking that business decision to say, okay, we can still affordably promote this bundle or this upsell, this downsell. So this still makes financial sense for us profitably. That is out of the hands of your ad agency, the actual numbers behind those offers and those incentives, but they will flag to you that that has to happen. So it's very important. I think it has to be a very symbiotic relationship where the ad agency is consulting with you, flagging with you what the bottlenecks are in your performance, and then to support you in order to implement them on your website or through your product offer.
That's quite a changing role, isn't it? Almost take on this kind of more of an advisory role, in terms of you're saying the roles, your skills 5 years ago to now, it's all about getting these numbers right, then working with their client to help them understand that. And obviously working with a lot of different businesses, you also have an idea of what your ideal, conversion rate should be. You've probably got more realism or finger on the market than someone who just works for a brand has. So you're also able to say, well, this is what I've seen elsewhere, these are the kind of things that work. So
one thing that's really important in knowing your numbers now is there's less data in general. So, especially after the iOS 14 update in 2021, where before, you could track pretty accurately if a sale happened within 28 days of someone clicking. Now, most Apple users have their data tracking switched off, which are arguably the more wealthy users on the platform. Slightly changing now, but that was the case. And then also you can only track the people that are being tracked, obviously, for 7 days after clicking. So what you see in your dashboard is so limited, but many brands are still using that as their source of truth. So if you're selling a product that is higher value and people take longer than 7 days to decide, then you're going to think your ads aren't working, when actually, when you look at your forecasts and you look at your numbers and you look over a wider time horizon, you're going to see, actually, we are hitting our KPIs and we are hitting our targets. But if we were just looking in our dashboard, we wouldn't know that. And I think this becomes even more complicated for brands that aren't just selling on Meta. So suddenly you've got the Google data feeding in, you've got TikTok, you've got Pinterest. So I know we were going to talk about this in more detail. You can't just look at your Meta platform data or your Google Ads data or your Pinterest data, because there are touch points across every single platform. Your email obviously feeds into this, your organic presence, if you're on a podcast, if you've got a PR mention, all these factors are contributing to your revenue. So you're doing each platform a disservice if you discount one over the other, because they're all contributing. So that's why now most agencies will be advising you on your blended return. Now this doesn't always land that well with brands who aren't maybe as numerate as others, or maybe I usually can tell how mature a brand is by how well versed they are in these things, because your blended return really is your only truth. So what money you put in and what money you get out, that's the return you get on your marketing investment. because you have no idea how many devices people are using to view your products, you know, where they saw you, if they opened your emails. It's impossible to know exactly what the customer journey's been. But if you track those numbers, you'll know. And also, what money do you have left? You know, after you've, you know, invested in your ads, after you've taken away those variable costs. So, you know, maybe you invest up and down in your ad spend, maybe you bring in different freelancers, maybe your transaction fees change and your COGS change, because the more you sell, these vary, so they go up and down. But then you've got your fixed costs as well. So how much is that taking out of your take home as well? So keeping a track on what's actually left in the kitty afterwards is really important. And it's really hard to do in e-commerce, because obviously you've got your cash flow kind of going independently of that, because you've got to pay for stock every now and again. You know, massive cash outflows happen and you won't see that back again for a few months probably. So having a really robust system to be able to kind of predict how much revenue you'll have in every month based on what you're spending can really help you manage that cash flow. And then you're not in that panic situation where you need to order more stock and suddenly you don't have the money there to do it.
Well, that horrible VAT bill that arrives in January after you've had 3 months of good sales and so your supplies need paying. That's the other classic one, isn't it? It's so true though, because the role actually of measuring all these different platforms, it's got so much more technical. Every platform doesn't add up. We all know that every platform has some kind of, seems to measure its own success more, you know, it kind of gives itself more an inflation compared to the other platforms it tracks against, you know, so you can't add 2 + 2 and get to 4 anymore, can you? So it's a very sophisticated thing now, and a brand doesn't necessarily have that focus on the numbers and the understanding around that. So
I think
they
as
can't
well,
expect it all to add up. In the past it kind of did add up far more. Everybody used Google. Now there's a lot more different ways of browsing for products. You know, it's changing so quickly.
Definitely. I think there's also the complexity about using third-party reporting software as well, because a lot of the times it's too expensive for like a smaller e-commerce brand to invest in those. There's arguments about how accurate they are anyway, so it does save time for people like the financial directors to see all the numbers coming in. For smaller brands, they would rather spend money, I'd argue, on their ad spend rather than reporting. Whether that's the right answer or not, you know, it's everyone's up to them how they spend their, you know, their spare cash in their business. But I think sometimes for smaller brands, they overcomplicate things as well. So you either have the brands that do no forecasting and put their head in the sand about the numbers, and then you have the others that spend way too long on it and overcomplicate it and probably spend too much energy on it when they should be looking at what's actually happening day to day in the business. So I think there is a bit of a balance that needs to be met there.
So in terms of forecasts themselves, obviously the seasonality is a big factor. And at the moment, you know, I imagine you're saying that it's very critical, isn't it, coming up towards Christmas now, that these forecasts get done. So what kind of activities should someone be doing now for their forecasts to ensure they have a successful Christmas?
So not every brand has their biggest quarter at Christmas. So I'd say what I'm about to share, you should do it based on when your busiest quarter is. So for some of our clients, summer's their peak, and for others it's Christmas. So I'd say even now, if you're forecasting for Christmas, you're probably a little bit late, because a lot of brands have already ordered their stock for Christmas. Some order it in February. It's really early because they know the lead times and everything like that. Yeah. So you need to think about what you're doing for Black Friday, if anything, because a lot of brands, the big ones, will make a loss on Black Friday because they know they're capturing new customers for the next year. If that's the case with you, your forecast will look very different to someone who really needs to make money on their Black Friday offers. So I'd try and do the maths on those. So what do I need to make? Do I have the stock for that? And what do I need to spend to sell that thing? Okay, so that's something that you should be working on now. I'd say it's a good rule of thumb to reforecast whenever you do an offer. If you ever do any collaborations with anybody and maybe you're doing a revenue split or, you know, profit share on those sales, again, your margin's less. So you've got less to spend really to profitably sell that collaboration or whatever you're selling. Arguably, if you're collaborating, the other party will also be marketing. So you'll probably, well, you should, it should be okay. But that's also something you need to consider. Like, what if they don't hold up their end of the bargain? Is this still going to be a profitable venture to do this collaboration? What is their audience? What is their market share? Brand awareness, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Usually at Christmas, and I'm saying this if it is your peak season, your buyer intent is high. So organically, people are looking for you. They're in the market to buy from you. Theoretically, it's going to be cheaper for you to sell in that period, even though costs go up, because people are actively buying what you want to sell. So I would see how much you can afford to spend more. So how much more can you invest to capitalise on that organic demand to make more for your business? Mm-hmm. Usually advertisers will kind of front load for Q4, or that they will make sure they've got more ad budget aside for those peak months because they know there's more money to be made. And then for the lower season, they'll invest less.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So you're saying, partly for your peak season, then also doing a kind of campaign level forecasting as well. Is there anything else? Is it too much detail to go into things like the product categories, regions that they sell in, Because you talked about people going into too much detail. Are there really 2 or 3 things they should focus on in their forecasts?
I think this really depends on your budget. So smaller brands, probably just your average AOV and work out your margin on that.
Yeah.
For bigger advertisers that maybe advertise cross-regionally, internationally, absolutely do forecasts per country, because you'll have different delivery costs. You just have different costs associated with each order. Mm-hmm. I'd also argue if you have a couple of signature products that are your best sellers, but that also have very different margins, you probably should be promoting those in separate campaigns, because it'll be really hard for you to see if you've been profitable or not if you have them all together in one, say, Advantage Plus sales campaign. So work out what your target return needs to be for those products. That's really important. And a lot of brands don't do that, and then they wonder why their numbers are a bit tight. It's because people have been buying maybe lower value items and they forecast it for the higher margin and they haven't made that. So that's quite important to factor in.
So really the concentration of the product, how many of their product sales coming from one particular product or product range. And then obviously would you then match a stock to that product range as well? You try and match your stock holding to make sure you get enough stock for that product as well,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
factors,
forecasting stock is a whole different thing outside of ads, but it's so important because there's nothing worse than promoting something that absolutely flies off the shelf and then it's gone and you have to pause the ad, because no ad account loves a stop and start. So, but it's unavoidable sometimes. Sometimes you'll start selling something and not really know. You might know that there's been interest, but you don't know how wild it's going to get when you start promoting, and you just can't predict that happens. It happens sometimes, and within 48 hours you're out of stock. I mean, it's it sounds dreamy, and every e-commerce brand's like, I'd love to sell out in 48 hours, but then what do you sell next? You've got nothing left, and then you're losing money because you've got nothing else to sell. So it's quite important to factor that into.
And as the agency, it's not always clear to you as well. You don't necessarily know that the stock's run out, do you? Because you don't see those figures. So suddenly your ad stops performing, then you have to search out why that is, and it might just be that the category is misclassified, something's gone out of stock, something else has happened operationally.
What's the first thing we check? To check the stock level if suddenly the ads stop performing. But it's really difficult when you're promoting lots of different products, lots of different product ranges across lots of different clients. It's just impossible to be watching stock on everything every single day. It's usually kind of a bit of a partnership in that. So our client will flag, like, we do have low stock of this, but we want to promote it anyway. And then we'll be keeping an eye on it. Mm-hmm. So whenever there's a new launch happening, it's one of the first things we ask, like, how many units do you have? Have you sold this thing before? So we get a sense of what the appetite might be for it. If it's something completely new, you never really know. If they're not testing it organically first, but it's just a launch, you just hope they have enough stock of it. That is, because it's out of our control whether they've bought enough or not. We're just there to promote it for them. But yeah, I think sometimes it's harder for smaller brands who make everything themselves, because then they just can't keep up with demand. Yeah. So then they're kind of capped on how much they can make as well, which again is a whole different situation. It's more a supply chain issue than a ad issue or a forecasting issue.
I was going to come on to ask you different reasons why people don't meet their forecasting targets, and you've just got a really good one here, basically that they just can't keep up with demand. So what are the reasons might it be? You know, you put all this effort into the forecasting, but you're not achieving your goals. Where would you start looking when that doesn't happen?
So the biggest one for us is when a brand will come to say, this is we want to make X amount next month, or, you know, this quarter. I'm like, okay, so what marketing activity is in your strategy to achieve that? So they'd, we might be launching one product a month, a new product a month. It's like, okay, well, if you sold out all those products at that price and it was only sold with ads, you still wouldn't be hitting that target. So what else have you got to sell to hit that target? So sometimes there's a disassociation between what the target is revenue wise and what number of units and what you're actually going to sell to hit that target, and, you know, what the budget is to achieve that target. So you kind of have to have an idea of how much of your overall revenue is generated by your ad spend, which is really hard to measure because attribution is so bad. You know, how much did the organic contribute to last month's revenue versus your ads? You need to take an educated guess, I'd say. You can look at the numbers, but again, they're going to be overinflated. So then you can kind of calculate how much budget you would need to hit the next revenue goal based on the percentage of your current revenue that's being generated by ads. Then you have to add into, you know, diminishing returns, which is a whole other thing that, you know, your ROAS doesn't stay steady the more you invest. There's always going to be a little bit of deterioration in your returns. So as we were kind of talking before we came on this, there are so many metrics that you don't know 100%, which is why you can't get bogged down too much and say, well, how much is coming from this platform and how much is coming from this? You probably won't know once you've got multiple platforms until you start like incrementally increasing the budget or decreasing it on one channel, and you'll see what impact it has on your bottom line. Then you'll understand the impact of that one channel on your general business. And if you've got a longer consideration window, say 3 months, like one of our clients, they know it's roughly 3 months from new like awareness to buying, you're going to have to wait 3 months to see the impact of that change in the budget. So a lot of brands just don't have the patience or the kind of, that sounds negative and on them, but they kind of need to know quicker than that what the impact is. But sometimes you just don't know unless you do that monetarily, invest more or less in your ad spend. Another thing as well is this kind of idea that the metrics in the dashboard are the truth. It's not the truth, and that sometimes decisions are made based on the wrong information, and then the forecast isn't hit as well. I also always have to stress that the data in the forecast, it is literally just a forecast. It's not a crystal ball. So, for example, you might be using a certain cost per click to help make your calculations, and that could be historic data. But then the month you're in, the cost per click could be much lower, which is brilliant because that means your returns theoretically should be higher, or they could skyrocket for some reason, and then obviously your performance is going to change. So it has to be, this is what you will get based on these metrics being hit. If they're not hit, you will not achieve this. And that's either because you're going to earn less or more. You know, it's kind of, so yeah, it's quite hard sometimes, especially for newer advertisers, to understand that this is literally, if these metrics are hit, these are the calculations of what you'll get. If these are different in any way, that number will be different.
Well, that's a contradiction, isn't it? You know, we say spend all this time forecasting, but we'll never actually predict what's going to happen. But the value really is going through the exercise of looking at these numbers, looking directly where they're going, and then saying, this is what I think I can do, let me try again, and incrementally trying to get these numbers up, isn't it? And it's also, that concept.
You know what you need to hit to get there. So if you can see that your AOV is not where it has to be, you know you need to work on that. So it's kind of signposting where your leaks are. So that's why forecasting is really important. It's not going to tell you you're going to hit this next month. It's telling you if you achieve these goals within the forecast, you will hit that. I think that's where the miscommunication is on what a forecast is. People think, oh, you're telling me you're going to definitely hit me that return this month. No, as a partnership, we will if these are met. So if your AOV, cost per click, conversion rate are in line, you can achieve it. But at the moment, these metrics aren't in line, so you're not going to hit that. No, and we can help you with this. but this work needs to happen on the website, this needs to happen here. So I think, if anything, a forecast is good to show how the partnership works well. That it's not just the ad agency that hasn't pushed a button and then you didn't achieve your goal. But there is still a misconception that that's the case.
And human nature is to go for something new and exciting and launch a new product, not to sit there and review every single margin of every single product which is selling at the moment and seeing if that's high enough to achieve your goal. You know, that doesn't sound like an exciting task to do, does it? You know, but it's so important, because if you haven't got the right pricing, you won't get your margins, therefore you'll never achieve, despite whatever you're doing that's shiny and new and in one place.
But I think it's a mirror. Forecasting is a mirror to your business to see where the gaps are. And that's why, I mean, it is painful if you're not if you're not a numeric person and your weakness is your attention to detail. It is a very onerous task, and this is why lots of people don't enjoy it. But that's why you work with partners that do this to support you with it. You know, if it's not something that comes naturally to you. But I do think there is responsibility on the e-commerce brand to be numerate, so they understand. But if you don't know, I mean, you'll be educated by your agency, if they're good, as to why the numbers matter.
So you've got a spreadsheet that does exactly this, haven't you? A new forecasting spreadsheet.
So we're working on it. So we had one, and it's evolving, because the questions we get around it and the data that we have available is changing. I did create a little tool with AI, actually, because now we're talking about AI, about how the AOV, conversion rate and cost per click, how, if you vary that but keep your budget the same, what your return will be. And it's really eye-opening for especially maybe brands that are newer to all these numbers. The impact, even like a small change in your conversion rate on your website has to your return, even if everything else stays the same. It's the same, like if your cost per click is reduced just fractionally, how much it increases your return, and how much increasing your AOV increases your return. It's crazy, like the levers, like how much of an impact it has. So that's just to visually help. It's not like a full forecasting thing, but it just helps to illustrate the importance of taking note of those figures.
It does now, and I think things like that are simple. When people put in the numbers, they can then see how it works. Whereas until you actually do that, it still sounds quite an abstract concept, doesn't it? Whereas if it's your business and your figures and you've got a tool, you can actually plug in these numbers and look at it, you can suddenly actually see it. And I think it's visibility, isn't it, in the business, which is so essential.
Yeah, and it can be huge. The difference can be huge with just a tiny tweak in any of those numbers.
It does indeed. Well, time is ticking by. Is there anything else you'd like to say or tell me about? I know you've got a book. You're talking about a book you're producing.
So yes, I've written a book. Title is yet unconfirmed. It's back from the proofreader, and it'll be released in September. And it's to help demystify a lot of things around meta advertising for e-commerce brands, because there's so many myths around, misconceptions, that I just thought I wanted to make it really clear and what the truth is around meta ads, to kind of make it less daunting and have less fear around it, and to see really the power of meta ads to scaling e-commerce brands.
Fab, I see you post a lot on LinkedIn about that as well, so that'd be really good to get all of that.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Aggie, that was amazing. I'm going to finish it here.